Hi there, it's Ian here, and you're watching Grumpy Opinions, the show where I'm going to tell you all about what I think of films, TV shows, games, and life in general. Let's get on with the show. Outlander is a Starz entertainment show about Jamie Fraser, who lives in the 18th century, and Claire Randall, who lives in the 20th century, separated by time, and it all gets really complicated after that, so let's just get on with it. Episode 4 of Lost Things starts off with our Jamie working in the stately home of that guy off Game of Thrones. And it's a posh English manor, Hellwater, the one we saw last week. But that man isn't alone, obviously. He's got 2 young daughters and a groom called Mackenzie, that's actually Jamie, but he's going under another name. And despite the fact that Jamie was a Jacobite, the posh bloke respects him and says that the household, that he's only an ex-servant of Lord John rather than being an ex-convict. And everything seems okay, although none of the grooms likes working for young Lady Geneva because she's a bit of a mardy cow. But her sister, who's nice, and is head over heels for Lord John. And she chats with Jamie about sexy Lord John, and he can only try and very subtly point out that maybe Lord John isn't the marrying kind. But the trouble is the Mardy sister gets married off to a rich old bloke, and she clearly isn't happy about it. And the guy makes a crack about drowning any red-haired kids that he had when he sees Jamie, and wouldn't you know, that gives Miss Fancy Pants a wee idea, and she goes out riding and requests Jim to come with her, and then pretends to fall off her horse so he has to pick her up, but he's not having any of her nonsense, so he just dumps her in the mud, but clearly, she still wants a holiday in Fraserborough. So later on, Lord John pops up for his monthly chess game, and when his brother rocks up, of course, Big Brother Melton, he's savvy enough to know that there's something weird going on about him and Jamie under a different name, but he doesn't give the game away. But he still clearly makes plain he thinks it's a bad idea, and he takes the ladies away again. Of course, spoiled wee Sassy Pants doesn't give up easy, so she decides to just be playing with him, telling him that he isn't happy about the wedding, and that she can't bear to give her chastity up to a horrible old man, when a man like Jamie's right there in front of her. So obviously he says no, but then she's got an ace up her sleeve. See, she got Lord Melton drunk, and he said that she was your red Jamie, and she's threatening to give up Jamie's secrets, so he hasn't got much of a choice, so he finally agrees, and that night he sneaks up to her bedroom. Of course, after some early jitters, they both get into it, and a reasonably good time is had by her, certainly. But it's more like a sex ed class than a romantic time, and once they're done, they have a wee bit of snuggle and chat, and Jamie gives her a wee soliloquy about how love is different from lust, and how it's not just the feelings there, it's something more important. And then a wee bit later down the line, she comes back to Hellwater, and wouldn't you know it, she's got a baby bump. But there's trouble with the pregnancy, so Jamie has to take her sister over to see it, and the nurse tells him that the baby's a boy, and he's all well and healthy, but very shortly later, Lady Geneva only goes and dies. Happens a lot in those days. And then the rich bloke goes totally nuts. See, he knows that the baby isn't his, and he's threatening to kill him, but then Jamie ends up talking the situation down, getting the pistol off of his own boss, and then ends up shooting the rich idiot when he tries to kill the baby, saving his son, and they name the son Willie. Now later on, he meets up and, he's forgiven by his, Lady Geneva's sister. But then Lady Geneva's mourning mum comes up and has a quick word in the ear, and it turns out that the Earl's death is getting chalked up to suicide. See, it helps out helping the right people. And saving her husband's life has made her generous, and she's willing to have Jamie released from his parole so he can go home. But, Jamie wants to stay with his wee laddie, even if only in secret, so he refuses. And then years later, he's teaching wee Willie to ride horses, and it turns out that the boy's a chip off the old bloke, and their similar features are something of a joke around the house. But the day eventually comes when Jamie has to go home, because, it's getting to the point where someone's going to notice and really work out that he's actually little Willie's dad. And he ends up having a wee argy-bargy with the boy after saying he has to go, but he gets the better of his temper, and then they have a heartfelt cuddle. So just before he goes, Lord John and him have a bit of a heart-to-heart as well. See, Lord John's figured out the truth about Willie, and he knows it's time for Jamie to go away. So Jamie makes Lord John promise that he'll look after Willie in exchange for some gnocchi. Now, Lord John's a bit flabbergasted, but refuses to take him up on the offer. Instead tells him that he's actually planning to marry Lady Geneva's sister, Isabel, and by extension will actually become Willie's stepdad, so can totally look after him anyway. And Jamie's over the moon and swears his friendship to Lord John forever. So that night, when he's lighting a candle to St. Anthony, the saint of lost things, he tells wee Willie all about the people he's lost, and then he baptises him as a Catholic, and then ends up giving him a wee carved snake before going back to Scotland. Oh, it's sad. Meanwhile, in moderner times, we find Claire, Roger and Bree in 1968, picking up from the end of Season 2, where they're trying to piece together a timeline of Jamie's life and find out that he was in Ardsmuir prison, and they reason from that he must have been put on a ship to the colonies. But then Claire gets a call from her old pal Joe, who wants to know when she's coming back to Boston, because, there's lots of operations and things needing done, and she's not sure, but it's obviously starting to bug her that she's away. While Bree and Roger are busy getting better and better acquainted, only getting even more so. They end up heading down to the National Archives, and they find that there's no shipping manifest for the years they need, and they start to get a bit down. And then later, Claire and Bree are getting jip at the bar, because in Scotland that's not really the done thing, women at a bar. And Claire gets even more morose about things, and she's really down. And just as things are starting to look at their bleakest, she decides it's time to have a toast to all things lost. And then she decides it's time to go home, back to Boston. Aww. So what did I think? Well, this was a curious episode from a storytelling point of view, as we're back to having a tiny snippet of a day or two of Claire's story, while years and years of stuff is happening in the 18th century, kind of a reversal of what happened with the other week. And it was absolutely great to see Bree and Roger again, and the pair of wee smashers playing them. And it's really nice to know that Claire and Joe are still pals after all these years. I'm always surprised that maybe nothing happened with them. I think it would have shown us if it had. But, you can't have everything. And then the Jamie story, it was a strange and fascinating sort of return with like war and prisons of earlier weeks to this kind of Downton Abbey meets Poldark sort of rich English manor drama. And again, it was really good to see Lord John doing his bit and having a wee cameo scene with Lord Melton. And it gives the whole universe a richer feeling, when you've got like characters coming back. I'd also really like to commend the actresses Hannah James and Tanya Reynolds, who played like the sisters Geneva and Isabella respectively. Both of them do remarkably well with, quite frankly, not a huge amount to work with, but each of them gets across a very slightly different character in a nuanced way. This is definitely more the case with Geneva, and I know she's a character who's really kind of loathed by the fan base because, she is a spoilt brat and she's a kind of slightly creepy coercion rapist, but, Hannah James does some really good work with like little looks and face quirks to show their real human vulnerability, which is important. And I know I might get stick from this because she's something of an irredeemable character. And I'm just going to say it, right? Some of the Outlander fan base is a bit merciless about any character that does anything bad to Jamie or Claire. But to me, she came across as kind of a tragic figure. She's one that's just about to be sold off like chattel to some horrible old get in an arranged marriage. So she wants to strike back at him. And the first petty way she can think of is like, he mentioned ginger babies, so she goes off and gets herself pregnant by Jamie. And she does show an awful lot of vulnerability, especially when she get naked. And then, she's only really a scared, naive wee lassie who's clearly never been told off in her life or told no. And she's obviously not been shown enough affection from her parents because she thinks that she's in love with Jamie after just one wee bit of nookie. That said, the dirty wee whore does blackmail a guy into sex and gets pregnant in the process, and that's just downright horrible. So aye. Anyway, good acting, creating character that I felt sympathy for, but at the same time really didn't like. But moving on to the bad, since frankly, there's more bad this week than good, in my opinion. My grumpy opinion. Right. Let's start off by talking about rape for a moment. More specifically, can we talk about Diana Gabaldon's obsession with people getting raped in this show? We've had Claire almost raped by Jack Blackjack twice in season 1, not to mention like all the threat of from the castle blokes in Leigh and from Drunk Dougal. Jamie gets raped by Blackjack in season 1 as well. Wee Mary got raped by in season 2, and the same guy tried to rape Claire. And now we've got Jamie getting forced into sex only a couple of episodes into season 3. I think herself might need to speak to someone about her bit of her obsession with throwing this into all her leads every 5 minutes. And not to mention, like, all the kind of borderlism, sadism that she gets throwing at Jamie right since episode 1 of season 1. I get it. He's supposed to be like the king of men and heroic and awesome and everything, but surely part of that awesomeness would be like not getting injured and captured and shot and kidnapped and beaten up and basically sexually assaulted in practically every single episode. I'm not sure what we're supposed to be taking from this story, other than maybe the fact that Diana Gabaldon thinks that the perfect bloke is one who's like constantly being in pain or hurt or something. And I'm kind of making a joke of this because it's a bit of a horrible subject matter, and I don't really want to make this video too heavy, but it's been kind of baffling me. All this kind of weird sadistic joy, and maybe Diana Gabaldon's into sadism or BDSM or something. That's totally okay. She's maybe not. I'm maybe misinterpreting this, and everyone's allowed to be into whatever they are. I don't judge. People should be allowed to enjoy their sexuality in whatever way they feel about it. But this comes across as just a wee bit excessive to me. Anyway, moving on. Sticking with Jamie's story, I kind of wish they hadn't condensed 6 years of story time into him making a life in this manor home just in one episode. I want to see Claire and Jamie get back together again, obviously, but I feel like they're rushing this. Similarly, we had 20 years of Claire's life last week, and I kind of grudgingly accepted that because, she's living in the 1950s and 60s as a doctor and raising a child in Boston, and while there's a lot of scope for plot, it's not as exciting as 18th century intrigue and pistols and swords and all that kind of stuff, so I get it. They skip over stuff. But here we've got Jamie, a disgraced Highlander working in a manor house in England, trying to keep his head down and keep secret. And he's trying to get, on with things in that place and only finds himself in the grasp of a nasty girl who wants to use him for her own ends. But I mean, we get 2 scenes of exposition, and then he's in bed with her. I mean, and literally about 3 minutes of screen time later, she's dead and there's a baby. And then it's all just like Willie and Jamie stuff. Now, this is the kind of stuff that would have built character. And if we'd shown Jamie growing and changing over all these years, it would be interesting, but they're not really doing that. I mean, he's basically the same stoic, broody beefcake that we saw shoveling hay back in the stables of Castle Leach in season 1. And that might be nice, but I'd kind of like to see some character development. I mean, we saw Claire grow and change and age, and Jamie's now supposed to be 8 or 9 years down the line since Culloden, but he seemingly hasn't really changed. He got a bit quiet for a time, and now he's just going back to being how he was at the beginning of the show. I mean, you could argue that he's kind of in a sense of limbo since losing Claire, but come on, he's now got a secret son that's, and he's working on this large house with lots of servants, and he's got this boy to, kind of look after and help when he's growing up. Maybe it's just me, but you think that would put a new bit of happiness into his life, and maybe would be the impetus he needs to just move on and, get a girlfriend or something. I mean, on a final note this time, it's always difficult with child actors, but the wee kid playing Willie just saying, "Stinking papist!" like every 2 minutes just kind of grated on my nerves after the first time he said it. I mean, I just found that a bit weird. And that might have been partly to do with like some of the structural things. I'll get onto that in a second. But I also felt like the Claire storyline was a wee bit phoned in this week. Like, obviously they needed Claire to appear in the episode, and it was good that we got back to like 1968 Claire with Bree and Roger. But let's face it, nothing actually really happened in that. I mean, Bree and Roger have a wee chat, and then they stole a little kiss, and that was sweet and everything. But there wasn't actually really much in the way of plot development, and didn't really go anywhere. It was like, oh, okay, oh, they have a kiss and she runs away, and it's like, right, what happens next? Oh, we don't get to see nothing. I mean, and it wasn't even a decent length scene. And then Claire just giving up because Joe called and like said, oh, we could kind of use you back at the hospital, and then they couldn't find a shipping manifest. I mean, this just doesn't seem like Claire. I mean, maybe more time has passed than's meant to be like shown in the show, but remember Claire's wee face at the end of season 2, the face that lit up with the sunshine coming over the rocks and everything. That face gave up after a week of actually productive research. I mean, come on, they found stuff, they found information, they know he's alive, they proved he's alive, they know he was at the prison. Then they can't find the shipping manifest, and someone gives her a funny look in a bar, and it's like, boom, Nat Bree, we're back off to Boston, and that's it. I don't care, if you're having smooches with, wee hunky Roger. So come on now. I mean, it just made the episode feel weird and unwieldy because, from a structural point of view, it made it feel odd. Like, the storyline was tied up the moment that Jamie decided to stay on at Hellwater for a start, so that felt like an ending to the episode. But then there was all the other scenes that came after that of him and Willie and Lord John, and I felt like that should have been another episode. And what really made that obvious was the fact that I was hankering for Claire scenes and actually a clear timeline plot for the episode, but there really wasn't one. There was nothing really happening in it. It was all kind of like filler. And that, for me, felt a wee bit crappy. I mean, to me, this honestly has to be one of the poorest episodes of Outlander I can ever think of. And to be honest, I imagine a lot of the fan base will agree for me, but for other reasons. Because, I mean, I've seen plenty of people on the Twitter, like, saying that they hate all the Geneva stuff and they were planning on skipping the episode. And frankly, if they did, they didn't really miss anything other than Willie being born and Claire and Bree deciding to go back to Boston. I mean, there's really nothing else in the episode of that much importance. I mean, that's maybe why this episode's odd and feels a bit half-baked. Maybe they knew that folk would skip it, and maybe that's why, they snuck in that weird cover of the Bob Dylan song that sounded like Angus and Julia Stone or something. I mean, where that came from, I have no idea, because it didn't make sense, and it wasn't contemporary music. And anyway, I mean, it's a bit odd. It just felt like this was like rushed out at 5:30 on a Friday night, But still, at least the plot is now up in the air and it'll be interesting and I can't wait. And next week has to be better than this. So until then, I've been Ian, and these truly have been some properly grumpy opinions.